Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, everybody. I'm so glad you're back. This is Holly from Holly's Pandorium, and I have a very special guest with me today, William Becker. Hello, William.
Hello, Holly. Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, William is a fellow psychic medium and he has some amazing stories and I love them. He has some wonderful things that he does currently with teaching and sharing, and his gifts are amazing. But I especially love his introduction into the paranormal because it's very like what a lot of us have been through. So if you've ever felt like something was going on in your life and you didn't understand it, here's somebody else that can totally relate to what you went through because he went through it also. So if you wouldn't mind, William, if you would mind sharing with us how you got started, how did this all happen with you? How did you become a psychic medium?
Okay, be happy to. I saw my first ghost when I was about 8 or 9. It was a
Okay.
nice sunny afternoon, and in a part of town that I knew, but I didn't get to very much. It was a long bike ride down and then back up a very, very steep hill. So I was down there when we were visiting people or doing things with my parents. And this was back in the 60s. I'm old. Um, Early 60s. And
Okay.
back when the town I grew up in, we had to pass school bonds every year or every other year.
Right.
I'm from a long line of teachers. So dad was teaching, mom wasn't teaching full time yet. She was subbing.
Mm-hmm.
And she and another friend of ours were off stomping to get the school budget passed. And one of my dad's colleagues' wife was watching my sister and I, this other friend's son, who was in my class, and they had other couple had 4 kids of their own.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were, I think the oldest was probably 9 and the youngest was a toddler.
Mm-hmm.
And the mother that was babysitting us sort of passed out on the sofa
Oh,
like early afternoon.
right.
And so the 7 of us, were exploring around the bluff and the elevator and the grand staircase and all this. And I kept seeing this little boy with red hair, dressed a little funny. He looked a little off, a little strange, but he looked like a solid little boy.
Okay.
And just like the rest of us, same age. So I asked the friend whose mother was babysitting us who it was and if he could play with us. And my friend said, "No, that's Carl Green. He's dead. He died of typhoid." And it was like, "Oh, okay." And then we just kept doing our thing.
Right.
And um, I hadn't thought about it for decades. And then I met, I took it, my sister and her kids were in town. So we took one of Rocky Smith's ghost tours, Northwest Ghost Tours.
Right.
And that's where I met Rocky. And he was just getting ready to talk about a ghost, a little boy ghost. Um, they call the little redhead boy. And he explained that who one theory of who this could be. And in my mind, I went, "No, that's not who it is. It's Carl Green." And just as I was saying that,
Oh,
Rocky said the other is that this little boy is Carl Green.
wow.
And I wasn't reading Rocky's mind. It's just
No.
that incident, that story came back to
Sure.
mind.
Right. Of
That
course.
memory from, God, 45 years earlier or something like
Right.
that.
Right.
And so it was nice. It was fun confirmation for me.
Yeah.
I grew up in Oregon City and we had lots of flowing water and lots of breweries because the only time the flowing water didn't kill you was if it was turned into beer because it got cooked. Um,
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
we had lots of epidemics in this town till we got the new water supply put in 1915.
Sure.
But um, so that was my introduction, and it wasn't scary. It was like, oh, okay, cool.
Right.
And I'd always kind of believed in ghosts. You do as a kid. Um, I remember being a little freaked out by some places because they were just strange and I didn't understand them. But
Right.
um, and then one of the things I think you're talking about, it was after I had already graduated from university. I started working on the mediumship stuff pretty heavily when I was about 17, 18,
Okay.
and then getting into Oregon State. And at Oregon State, one of my friends had a friend that, Carol Kay, and she lived in this old house right by the big park
Hmm.
that was close to campus.
Hmm.
And we would go, this friend of mine and I, we'd go over there and have a meditation circle with her. And she supposedly studied under Chief Joseph's grandson or something. I don't know. I don't remember. Again, we're
Okay.
talking late 70s, so I get a little mid to late 70s. I get a little mixed up on that. But we'd fill the house and garden with beings. And it was fascinating and great fun. And I had other people in my life then who were also active mediums. And so I started working more and more with that, and basically on my own, but watching other people, watching what they were doing, and then practicing with other friends that were newly practicing too.
Right.
And spent years doing that. After graduation, for a little while in Portland, I had a job where I was meeting a lot of interesting people, good people, but some of them were dabbling in practices that they didn't really understand.
Sure.
And I noticed that I was getting more and more interesting little things flicking around my apartment that
Okay.
I didn't understand. They didn't feel threatening or evil or anything like that. I don't believe in pure evil.
Okay.
Um, but I kind of held back for a while on doing anything
Sure.
because I felt in over my head,
Smart.
and I let all that kind of settle down, and um, and then started doing more work. Now, even during the time I was not doing as much, I had a friend that lived in a haunted house in a haunted part of town, and I used to I quit walking there because at night because it was there were just too many entities around. I didn't
Yeah.
want to deal with just walking home in the dark up the hill.
And how old were
And
you at this time?
early 20s.
Early 20s. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this was after university. So and I started driving there, and almost every time I'd look in my rearview mirror and there'd be this smiling face in the back seat,
Okay.
and I would, I'd get it gone before I got home. And I saw the ghost in their house one time pretty solidly, I think. We
Yeah.
were at a Seder dinner, and I just saw him floating by the fireplace, and he was just keeping an watch on thing.
Yeah.
And turns out all the housemates had seen him at different times too.
Really?
I found that out later. I didn't mention it at the time.
Yeah.
Mm.
So did you talk with anyone really other than your little group of friends that you did the gatherings with? Did you ever talk to anyone else about what you were seeing or feeling?
Um, Only if they'd expressed interest and were part of it. Um,
Okay.
I grew up in a mill town,
Okay.
and um, I grew up with people great people, but had their ideas about what's what.
Right.
And so I was pretty young when I learned to keep my mouth shut.
I can
And
relate. Yep.
yeah, and I never fit in to the town, anyway. And
Right.
so you learn.
Yes.
And there were people, I had a circle of people around that were interested and fascinated. And even a place like Corvallis in the 1975 to 1980,
Yeah.
we had an India shop, and you could get, it was the agricultural school, not the hippie school,
Yeah.
and we still had all the hippie stuff, so
Right.
it
Right.
was great. Yeah,
Right. Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. So when was the first time you felt like I'm a psychic? When did that happen? How old were you?
I was actually probably in my late teens,
Okay.
maybe 20, 21, 22. Was,
Okay.
well, late teens to 20, because I was working with other people picking things up.
Okay.
And at this meditation circle, I was seeing these beings. And
Okay.
sometimes it was more physical, but um, third eye mostly. And
Okay.
especially when you're sitting at a table facing the fireplace and you're seeing them through the back of your head in the garden space too. So
Yeah.
um, I don't really have eyeballs back there.
Right.
And
just to clarify, public service announcement.
exactly,
Right.
exactly. And
Right.
so basically then, but I also knew, and I had other friends that were, and also knew I was pretty young at this and a beginner, and I had a lot of growth to do before I could say I was really a medium or a psychic,
Right.
in any way, even more than beginning amateur.
Yeah.
And
Did you
it
ever share this stuff with your parents? Did they know what was going on with you?
no, not until I actually started being more professional,
Okay.
and they seem fine with it. And
That's amazing. That's really
yeah,
nice that that's their response.
but this, I was over 50 and I was helping them, um, and it was a way I could help bring in some income when, well, they knew I was doing some paranormal work anyway, the
Right.
ghost stuff, and I had joined the team. I did a lot of Rocky's tours then
Mhm.
as well, and they knew that. And shoot, my family knew his family. I grew up with a lot of his relatives, older ones that I've
Really?
known since long before anybody had ever planned him coming around.
Yeah.
Because he had one of his, basically two of his great uncles were friends of my father's and
Nice.
colleagues, and my dad had his dad in school, and
Oh, wow.
his dad had worked at my mom's school for a little while. And I
Wow.
mean, it was just, it was a small town.
Sure.
You knew the people who had been around a while,
Right.
and there was one junior high at the time, and so
Sure.
um, you get to know people. So
Absolutely.
yeah, okay. Back. Sorry, the ADHD brain
Yeah. No, I
loses
totally get that.
goes off in the ozone sometimes. So
Right. Right.
excuse me,
No,
but
totally fair. That's okay.
but I um, I was going off and doing some conferences and stuff then, and um, they were cool about that. And I think I was talking about doing some teaching, or definitely seeing things. I was definitely working on it. My sister knew about it and was fine, and mom and dad were great about it at that point. I was helping them here. I mean, I hadn't necessarily quite moved in yet
Right.
to help, but I was close to that. They were close to that point,
Sure.
and
Sure.
I was here many, many times a week because of doctor's appointments or this or that, or
Right.
checking on caregivers or doing whatever. It's just how some people grow older is lots of work. And then
Right. Yes.
the last 2.5 years or so of both of their lives, I had to live here, and
Yeah.
so there was even more obvious at that point.
Right.
And they, people's attitudes changed. My parents were really pretty remarkable in that they opened up to a lot of things over time. They
Yeah.
weren't afraid to say, "Oh yeah, if I would have known then what I know now," you know.
And that,
And
thankfully, a lot of people do that with age, which is amazing and wonderful. I
mm,
was very blessed in that um, I am from a family of psychics, and I didn't know it.
mm,
And I learned through time that it was very prevalent in my great grandfather's generation and beyond that. And my mother was raised learning about all kinds of things and being in the church at the same time. It was all kind of meshed together, but it was
right,
compartmentalized. And so at church there was never paranormal references or conversations, but in
uh-huh,
the kitchen that was the safe spot, and we were allowed to talk about other things, but it
uh-huh,
was mostly my mom and I, and once in a great while my sister, but never discussed in front of my brothers or my dad. They just weren't open to it at the time. And
okay,
and I get that. It's not for everybody.
right,
Um, but that's part of where in my teens is when I found collective few that I could relate to and practice with,
mhm,
and not terrify. And that that was my weird group. I got to be around people that were like me, and everybody else I just never discussed it. I never brought it up. I never spoke about it. It was very, very few people that ever knew anything about that part of my life. um,
right,
so I'm very glad you got to do that with your parents. That's amazing that
yeah.
those conversations were available to you before they left. So that's great. That's
No, thank
wonderful.
you. Yeah, those conversations were easier than some of the other ones in life.
Of
Um,
course. Of course. I
but
bet.
yeah, and well, for me, as I got older, I didn't care as much about making an impression
Right.
or what other people thought, except for
Right.
my folks.
Yeah.
But even that, a lot of it was simply to make things less stressful for me as possible.
Right.
Um, and so it was nice. And we didn't have in-depth discussions about it, but
Right.
just some, you know, and they knew and it was fine. So,
That's neat. That's
yeah.
very cool. So let's talk a little bit about what your gift is like, because everybody's gift is different.
Hmm.
And I think if I remember correctly, we've talked about that we both believe that everybody can do this.
Yes.
So for anyone listening or watching, if you've never talked to a psychic before, here's two psychics that are not kids. We've been through the gamut of it. Anybody can do what we do, but everybody's gift works a little differently. So I'd love for you to share, please, with our listeners and watchers, viewers, um, what is your gift like? What is it? How does it work? And what do you do with people when someone comes to you for a reading?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's a good question. And if you don't mind, I'm going to add a little piece beforehand.
Please.
Yes, everybody has gifts, but that doesn't mean you're a professional medium within the first year.
Correct.
You're taking a single class or
Right.
doing whatever. I was studying and working for 40 years before,
Yeah.
or more, before, no, about 40, I think, before I went professional.
Yeah.
And then I had had enough very significant experiences
Right.
over and over again
Right.
that reinforced, and I had enough people telling me,
Right.
including my therapist, you should go pro. You should be
Right.
charging. you should be teaching, giving readings and such.
Right.
So I know one person that I feel good about working with or giving referrals to him after just a few years,
Sure.
because I watched him click and grow, and I've worked with him.
Nice.
And mostly it's like, no, do your time.
Right.
Um, it's like anything else. It takes study and it takes practice and it takes continual study and practice.
Yes.
None of us say that we've reached the end of our practice and study.
No.
We're still growing. So
Yes. Always.
that's the caveat, because I've often seen people that within a year or taken 2 classes of mine and they say, "How much should I charge?"
Oh,
And it's like,
Lord.
"Excuse me?" Um,
Gosh.
so yeah,
Whoa.
yeah. And I'm not trying to be rude or make fun of people. They're
No, no. I
genuinely
get
good
it. People get
people, and
excited.
yeah. And so it's just patience, folks.
Yeah.
Um, and you don't have to. My whole identity isn't on being a psychic medium.
Right.
It just happens to be a piece of the whole thing.
Right.
So, you know, if you're making it your whole identity, you might want to look at that as well.
Right.
Just off the top of my head. And please don't send hate mail. I mean this lovingly. But
Well, no, and I appreciate, and let me just caveat that a little bit too. So what he's talking about is everyone's got gifts, but not everyone should read for other people necessarily. And the enthusiasm and the excitement that goes with the paranormal is very high. When someone has a Bigfoot experience or a UFO experience or a psychic experience, the inclination is to dive into it like a 6-foot nosedive, just dive right into all of it and get excited. But genuinely, anything that you do, you want to temper with some practice and experience. And it does take a minute. It is not a painting class where you go and learn a few things, get a few skills under your belt, and you can reproduce something consistently. Psychic skills are based on energy and experience, and there's so many things that are involved. It genuinely takes time,
it
not
does.
1 or 2 years, but maybe 5 or 10 or more, just to really, because you don't do it every day, number one. Number two, the avenues for training and education are limited. It's not like you can go to a school and spend 8 months or 2 years or whatever and get a degree in psychicship, mediumship, or whatever. I'm not using my words well today. Sorry. But it's something that takes an involvement that's beyond the initial enthusiasm. So should
Right.
you be a psychic full time? Maybe, but take your time. It's not a race. It's a marathon, and you go slowly and steady and you learn lots of amazing things. Definitely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And uh, and you're asking about the types of gifts and stuff I do. There are a lot of different things. I see usually, and often I'll see words, but it's not like I'm reading them,
Hmm.
but I'm seeing them. I see the people. It depends on the entity, and I use the word entity or being simply because I don't like to put things in a box. And I think we have a lot of misunderstandings about what it is we're often really reading.
Right.
I haven't ever run across a trapped soul.
Okay.
I think we go where we need to go. I
Right.
run across people who like to hang out. Run across people who visit. Some they're gone, but they've left a piece of themselves here,
Right.
and that can be interactive. Some of it's just like looking at a photo album
Right.
or a silent movie on the wall or something. So
Right.
there's all kinds of stuff, and if they want to tell me what they want to be labeled, fine. Otherwise, I'm not going to give them a label.
Right.
I don't like to be labeled. So,
Right.
um, and that puts me to the other point too: respect. Give respect, folks. I have very strict standards in my classes
Hmm.
about the behavior, and partly we don't cleanse. I haven't ever really seen it work.
Okay.
I've seen a lot of mediums say it's worked, and I've watched the entities laugh.
Hmm.
And most cases I know about, um, it might have worked for a few days, and then they come back and they're not happy.
Right.
Um, so, and they know what they're doing better than what we know, and it's their place. So
Right.
I do more working. If there's a problem in a house, what I do more is help people understand who's there
Right.
and why and communicate. And I've had so many times where the people then say, "Oh, okay, well in that case, they're welcome to stay as long as
Right.
they've got some guidelines to,
Right.
not cross. Of course, there's no problem."
Hmm.
And I think that's a healthy way of doing it for everybody.
Right.
Um, and so actually that's one of the gifts or ways of working with it. This actually does go with what your question was,
Okay.
because a lot of it is presentation. Okay, let me backtrack on that a little bit. I don't mean that you're trying to present something that isn't real. I see things here and
Okay.
here. I
Right.
hear things here and here.
Right.
I just know things. I watch. Um, I've seen full bodied apparitions, not too often because that's a whole lot of work for them.
Right.
Um, I've seen the Fae. I've seen a lot of things with my own two eyes.
Right.
If I haven't seen it, experienced it in a physical manner,
Hmm.
I don't believe that it's necessarily a real type of phenomena.
Okay.
I I had to have a visual of ghosts to believe that they really existed. The same with Bigfoot or Fae, or with psychic, I had to have many, many solid confirmations that can't be made up.
Right.
Um, there's lots of things. And, but then with that, okay, if you're reading for people, you also have to be sensitive to the person you're reading with. And I try to not do any harm.
Right.
And so that's, y- one must be honest and give the truth and not sugarcoat necessarily what's being said.
Right.
My job, I'm not supposed to take somebody else's words that they're talking to me and then paraphrase them into something.
Right.
But I can make sure my delivery is in such a way that it's supportive.
Right.
And even if the words aren't supportive, and most of the time the words are, to be honest, supportive. I very often get entities who aren't apologizing. They're explaining
Right.
why they did what they did and the
Right.
purpose in that lifetime for my client and for the person that is coming through and talking to me.
Right.
That's part of our reincarnation cycle. So
Right.
that's something else we have to consider.
Sure.
Um, and just being sensitive enough. And if I'm doing a gallery reading or there are other people around when I'm giving a reading, if it's getting pretty intensely personal, I'll ask them if they want me to stop and we can try afterwards to
Right.
see if I can connect and finish everything.
Right.
I can't guarantee that at that point because,
Right.
but just giving the person a chance to not have to listen to everything in public,
Right.
because often those conversations get very emotional.
They do.
Um,
You're right. Yeah.
and often with a lot of gratitude, but still emotional. And
Right.
everybody's hearing, the family dirty laundry in a
Right.
lot of the cases. So you have to be aware of those things as well, and that takes time and observing human beings, not to do, not to be fake in your reading because you're reading signs from people.
Right.
That's not honest. But knowing how people are in their skin, are they okay?
Right.
Are they needing to breathe or take a break or,
Right.
something like that? That's what I'm talking about. Um,
Yeah, because a lot of psychic readings, I think what you're trying to say is they're very personal and they're
yes,
very in depth. And psychic readings are not just fluff and flowers of these wonderful things are going to come to you and everything's going to be rosy. A lot of what William's describing is what I've experienced many times, and it's very personal and it's very private. It's not stuff that you would just talk about at the mailbox with your neighbor. These are things that are incredibly in depth. And so being cautious and respectful is incredibly important. You must be aware of who you're talking to and what you're talking about because
right.
it takes a lot. And now being someone that does readings, can you share with everybody how do readings affect you after?
They used to make me really tired,
Okay.
and part of that is my ADHD brain, and it can take me a lot of work to concentrate.
Okay.
Um, and so, but I don't find I have that fatigue problem nearly as much as I used to. And I often really don't. It's like, okay, the reading's done. It's an hour later. What reading?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
um that's not always true.
Right.
And sometimes when somebody mentions or talks a little bit about it, I'll get it back again. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. And there was this. And
Right.
but so often I have people talk to me about things, friends of mine that we did things together and readings in wonderful places. And it's like, oh, that's right. We did do that, didn't we? I I'd forgotten.
Yeah.
Um, um, I like reading the history of locations, and that's a big part of what I'm teaching at the Oregon Ghost Conference this year.
Nice.
And I think it's really fascinating when we can observe more of the world around us and what helped build and lead to what is there now.
Yeah.
But I'm a history geek. I have a bachelor's in history, so
Right.
um,
So that makes sense. That's
yeah,
all part of what you like and what you're interested in. So that makes
yeah.
sense.
I'm a history tourist. When I travel,
Hmm.
it's more for the history of the locations than anything else, unless I'm going to visit friends.
Right.
Then it's both. But yeah, I'm trying to think if there's something else. I'm kind of an all-purpose omnivore type of a medium at this point, but it's taken time. You don't start out with as many things working.
Right.
I've worked with a lot of people who start out knowing, they don't see it, but they know it.
Right.
And they'll know that little girl standing over there has medium brown hair and is wearing a tan and white striped dress,
Right.
but they don't see it. They just know it.
Right.
And
They
over
sense it
time,
kind of. Yeah.
yeah, and then over time, they often start knowing it. I
Right.
mean, seeing it as
Right.
well. And so using the gifts, actually, I don't like that word either. It's part of who we are. It's part of our DNA that kept us from getting eaten by saber-toothed tigers and clubbed over the head by the neighboring Neanderthals. Um, and okay, that's very obviously oversimplified, but
But I know what you mean. So let
Right.
me caveat that for just a quick second. So what William's referring to, and this is something that not too many people think about, but if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. So there's a philosophy and a belief that psychic gifts are part of our survival instincts. And I have also heard from many studies and my own experience, a lot of police officers, paramedics, doctors, and nurses are psychic or mediums. They actually sense things from other people very quickly. They have a second nature about normal things that everyone has in their own body. They actually connect with in other bodies. And so the gift of being psychic is not new. It's very old. It's
Right.
not religious specific. It's in all cultures all over the world. And so
Right.
this perception of understanding things that are unseen or seeing things that are not physical in front of you is an incredible survival mechanism to allow us to continue as a species. And it completely makes sense to me when you sense don't go right, go left. And then you find out later there's a horrible wreck, or, things happen for a reason. People find later, maybe something wasn't smooth and okay. And you pull back from a situation and find out later, well, there was a good reason for that.
Right.
That's part of the psychic world. That's all part of that connection. It's not an accident. It's not a coincidence. It's supposed to be that way. You're supposed to survive. So you get these clues and these hints and these little pokes to your mind to get you to pay attention to other things going on around you.
Right.
And I love that we get to work on those and make them stronger. It's a muscle. There's been scientific studies. There's a Dr. Amen down in California has done incredible studies on the brain. And he's actually brain scanned a couple of different psychics and put these wonderful caps on with all these electrodes and actually studied psychics while they're doing a reading. And the conscious part of the brain is off. There's no lights at all. There's other parts of the brain that light up when someone is doing a psychic reading. It's completely different axis of the mind. So it only makes sense if you're a runner, you practice running. If you're a psychic, you practice psychic gifts. And yes, it is a muscle in the brain, and it does get stronger the more you use it.